There are sounds you learn to stop waiting for. The phone ringing on Christmas morning. Your name in someone's voice who used to call you mom. The knock at the door. That means your child remembered you exist. I stopped waiting for those sounds a long time ago. Not because I gave up. Because giving up and making peace are two different things. And I finally learned the difference sometime around the summer I turned 65. I am Josefina Wilson. I am 75 years old. I live in a small house in Tucson, Arizona, with a garden that takes up half my backyard, a cat named Biscuit, who has never once done what I asked him to, and 15 years of quiet that I built with my own two hands. And on a Tuesday evening in early October, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighbor Dolores had already stopped by that morning with a plate of pan dulce. My Tuesday circle at St. Catherine's had met the week before. I was in my kitchen, reheating leftover chicken soup, watching the 6 o'clock news with the volume turned low. The knock came at 6:14. I remember because I checked the clock on the microwave before I went to the door. I remember because something about the sound made me careful, not scared, careful. The way you get careful when your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. I looked through the peephole. I stepped back. I put my hand flat against the wall. Then I looked again because I needed to be sure. My son Alexander was standing on my front porch. He is 49 years old, and I had not seen his face in 15 years. He looked older, thinner in the face. His hair, which had been dark brown the last time I saw him, was streaked through with gray at the temples. He was not standing straight. His shoulders were curved forward in that way people hold themselves when they are carrying something they cannot put down. Standing just behind him, half a step back, was Sandra, his wife, the woman who 15 years ago put my clothes in black garbage bags and left them on the front porch of a house I helped buy. He was crying, not dramatically, not loudly, the kind of crying that a man does when he has been holding it for a long time and his body has finally stopped cooperating, shoulders shaking, eyes red. His hands were clasped in front of him like he was waiting to be led into church. I stood in my hallway for 4 seconds. I counted. Then I opened the door. Alexander looked at me the way people look at someone they have wronged and are not sure they have the right to be in front of. His mouth opened. He said, "Mom." Just that. Just my name. Sandra stood behind him. She was wearing a gray blazer. Her face was composed in the way it always was composed, controlled, watching, assessing. She did not look like she had been crying. She looked like a woman who had agreed to be somewhere she did not particularly want to be. I let the silence stand for a moment. 15 years of silence deserves at least a moment. Then Alexander said, "The bank is foreclosing on our home. We're $40,000 behind. We've tried everything. You're the only one who can help us, Mom. You're the only one." I looked at him, then at Sandra, then back at him. I said, "Did you bring the same trash bags your wife packed my clothes in when you two put me out at 52? The color left his face, not gradually, all at once, the way color leaves a photograph left in the sun too long. Sandra did not move. I looked at her for one more second. Then I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. "I have something to show you. Before I take you inside that house with me, before I tell you what happened when they sat down in my living room and what I showed them and what was said at my kitchen table over the next 2 days, I need to take you back. Because you cannot understand what that moment cost or what it meant or what I decided unless you understand what the 15 years before it felt like. And I am going to tell you all of it. If this story is already touching something in you, if you already feel something stirring, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. We are a community of women who understand that strength doesn't always look the way people expect it to. And drop your city and state in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back. I need to tell you about Alexander first, who he was before Sandra, who we were. My son was born in 1975 in San Antonio, Texas. His father, Ernesto Wilson, was the kind of man who made a room feel warmer just by walking into it. Ernesto coached Little League on Saturdays. He fixed the neighbors' cars for nothing. He called his mother every Sunday until the day she died. Ernesto died of a heart attack in 2003. Alexander was 28. I was 52. We buried him on a Thursday in November, and Alexander held my hand the entire time. On the way home from the cemetery, he pulled over to the side of the road, and we sat there for 20 minutes, not talking, just sitting. He never let go of my hand. That is who my son was. Sandra Merritt came into his life in 2005. She was 33, sharp, ambitious, organized in a way that I respected at first. She ran a small marketing firm in Phoenix where Alexander had moved for work several years earlier. They met at a conference. He called me the week after, and his voice had that particular quality, lifted soft at the edges, that told me before he said one word what had happened. I was happy for him. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely happy. I drove up to Phoenix to meet her in the spring of 2006. We had dinner at a restaurant she chose, a nice place, white tablecloths, the kind of menu where nothing has a price. I wore my good blue dress. I brought flowers for the table. I asked Sandra about her work, her family, her life. I listened. I was on my best behavior, not because I was performing, but because this woman mattered to my son, and therefore she mattered to me. Sandra was polite, precise. She answered my questions with the minimum number of words necessary, and redirected the conversation toward Alexander consistently. When I told a story from Alexander's childhood, a funny one about the time he convinced himself our cat could understand Spanish and spent a week trying to teach it, she smiled the way someone smiles when they are waiting for a moment to pass. I drove home and told myself I was being too sensitive, that she was nervous, that it takes time. They married in September of 2007. I was at the wedding. I sat at the family table. I danced with my son at the reception. I cried the right kind of tears. I wore champagne because Sandra asked me not to wear white or ivory, which I had not been planning to anyway, but the fact that she felt the need to specify told me something I filed away and tried to forget. The years after the wedding brought changes that arrived so gradually I kept mistaking them for something else. Alexander's phone calls grew shorter. They used to last an hour, then 40 minutes, then 15. Then he started letting them go to voicemail and texting me back later, always brief, always fine, always talk soon. Holidays became negotiations. Thanksgiving 2008, we ate with Sandra's parents, the Merritts, who lived in Scottsdale, a big house, manicured lawn, the kind of people who would not have given my first name a second thought. Christmas 2008, same. I drove up on December 26th. We had 2 hours. I told myself this was normal. Married children build their own lives. I was not going to be the mother-in-law who clung. In 2009, Alexander and Sandra bought a house in a suburb of Phoenix. A nice house, 3 bedrooms, a yard, a 2-car garage. I know the house well because I gave Alexander $20,000 toward the down payment. My retirement savings. Not a loan. A gift, because he was my son, and I wanted him to have the life he wanted. Sandra thanked me in a text message. In the spring of 2010, I drove up for Alexander's birthday. I had not seen him in 4 months, which was the longest stretch yet. I brought his favorite, a lemon cake from a bakery I had driven 40 minutes out of my way to find. I knocked on the door, and Sandra answered. She told me They were in the middle of something and asked if I could come back in an hour. I sat in my car in their driveway for an hour. I did not drive away. I did not call. I sat there with my lemon cake, and I told myself it was nothing. In September of 2010, Sandra sent me a letter, 4 pages typed, single-spaced. I will not read the whole letter to you, but I will tell you what it said. She said I was controlling, that I called too often, that I showed up unannounced, though every visit I had ever made was discussed with Alexander in advance, that my relationship with my son was emotionally dependent in an unhealthy way, that I made her feel like an outsider in her own marriage, that she had discussed this with a therapist, not a couples therapist, her own therapist, and the therapist had validated her concerns, that she needed me to respect the boundary of communicating only through her going forward, not directly with Alexander, through her. At the bottom, in a different font, Alexander had signed his name. I read that letter 8 times. I read it in my kitchen with my morning coffee. I read it again that night. I read it until I had memorized sentences I did not want memorized. Then I put it in a box in my closet, and I picked up the phone, and I called my son. He did not answer. I called 3 more times over the following week. Each time, voicemail. I left 2 messages, careful messages, asking him to call me, telling him I loved him, keeping my voice even. He did not call back. I wrote him a letter, handwritten, 6 pages. I told him I missed him. I told him I was not trying to come between him and Sandra. I told him I was sorry if anything I had done had felt overbearing and that I wanted to understand. I asked him to talk to me, just talk to me, mother to son, the way we always had. The letter came back 3 weeks later, returned to sender, Sandra's handwriting. In January of 2011, I drove to Phoenix. I know what you are thinking, but he was my child. And when your child stops speaking to you without a true conversation, without a real accounting, without looking you in the eye, your body does not accept it. Your body keeps moving toward them, whether your pride agrees or not. I knocked on the door of the house I had helped buy. Sandra opened it. She looked at me calmly and said my things were in the garage and that Alexander was not available. Before I could speak, she stepped aside, and I saw my son standing at the end of the hallway. He was looking at the floor. I said, "Alexander." He did not look up. Sandra stepped back and opened the garage door. There were 3 black garbage bags. My photographs, the serving dishes I had left there from Thanksgiving 2008. A cardigan I had forgotten the summer before, Ernesto's old chess set that I had given Alexander when he was 12. She said, without heat, without visible emotion, "We need you to not come back without calling first and getting approval from both of us." I looked at my son one more time, still looking at the floor. I picked up the bags. I put them in my car. I drove home to Tucson. I did not stop once. That night, sitting in my kitchen with Ernesto's chess set on the table in front of me, I allowed myself to understand what had happened. My son had chosen. He had been offered a choice, his wife or his mother, and he had looked at the floor. The person who drove home that night in January was not the same person who had driven up, but she was still alive, and she was going to stay that way. I want to tell you what I did not do before I tell you what I did. I did not call my son 40 times. I did not send certified letters to Sandra. I did not call the Merritt family. I did not post anything on Facebook. I did not go to my priest and ask him to intervene. I did not send a card every holiday and sign it with guilt disguised as love. I tried to reach Alexander twice more in the first year. Once on his birthday in April, I left a voicemail that I kept to 30 seconds. Once in November, on the anniversary of his father's death, because I thought surely that day would make him remember who we were to each other. He did not call back either time. After that, I stopped, not because I stopped loving him. You do not stop loving your child. That is a lie people tell themselves to make estrangement sound more final than it is. I stopped calling because I understood that a one-sided effort was not a relationship. It was me performing love for an audience that had left the theater. And I was 60 years old, and I could not keep doing it. Here is what I did instead. I retired from the Tucson Unified School District in the spring of 2012. 22 years as a school librarian. At my retirement party, the principal gave a speech. 3 teachers I had known since they were student teachers cried. A girl I had worked with during her 7th grade year. A quiet girl who lived in the library at lunch because the cafeteria was too loud for her. She was 24 by then, in graduate school for literature. She came to the party and brought me a card with a note inside that read, "You were the first adult who made me feel like my mind was interesting." That card is on my refrigerator. It has been there for 13 years. In September of 2012, I bought a house, not a rental. My house, 670 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that faces east so the morning light comes straight in, and a backyard that was bare dirt when I moved in. I started with 1 rose bush. Arizona rose bushes are stubborn, difficult things that fight the heat and bloom anyway. I liked that about them. My neighbor Dolores Ruiz knocked on my door the 3rd day with a plate of tamales and the specific directness of a woman who has been alive long enough to skip the small talk. She is 71 now, was 69 then. She had outlived a husband, raised 4 children, and developed very firm opinions about the correct way to make rice. We became friends within 2 weeks. Real friends. The kind where she has a key to my house, and I have a key to hers, and neither of us feels the need to explain why we are sitting in the other's kitchen at 10 in the morning. Tuesday mornings, I go to the women's circle at St. Catherine's. There are 8 of us, ranging in age from 58 to 81. We started as a Bible study and evolved into something more honest, a group of women who tell each other the truth because we are old enough to know that comfort without truth is just delay. Margaret Osborne, who is 81 and has a wit like a letter opener, kept me from drowning in self-pity more times than I have told her. Corinne Babcock, who lost a daughter to addiction and still shows up every Tuesday with her hair done and her chin up, taught me that continuing to live your life is not a betrayal of your grief. It is the only dignified response to it. In 2015, I took a solo trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I had never traveled alone, Ernesto, and I had always traveled together. But I booked a room at a small inn, drove up on a Friday, and spent 4 days walking through galleries and eating at a different restaurant for every meal and talking to strangers. On the second night, I sat on the inn's porch with a glass of red wine and looked at the Sangre de Cristo Mountains turning pink at dusk, and I thought, I am all right. Not every moment, but right now, in this moment, I am completely all right. I know you might be wondering how I got through the holidays. The grandchildren's birthdays I did not know about. The family events I was not invited to. I will tell you the truth. I kept a journal every single day. I am not a natural writer. My sentences are plain. My handwriting is cramped, but I wrote. I wrote about what I was feeling before I let it run loose inside me. I wrote letters to Alexander that I never sent. Not angry letters, honest ones. I told him about my garden. I told him when Dolores's granddaughter came for a visit and called me Abuela Joe, and how that name went straight through me like a needle. I told him when I found out through a Facebook post from someone I had gone to church with in Phoenix years before that he and Sandra had a daughter, Lily, born in 2014. And that 2 years later, there was a son named Mateo. I had a granddaughter named Lily and a grandson named Mateo, and I had never once been in the same room with them. I wrote that in my journal at 2 in the morning. I did not sleep the rest of that night, but I got up the next morning. I made coffee. I went out to water the rose bushes, which by 2016 had multiplied to 4. I told myself what I had been teaching myself for 5 years. Your life is not on hold pending his return. Your life is happening right now. Choose to be in it. I also did something practical that I am not sure I have ever told anyone. I started keeping a record, not obsessively, not with any plan of using it, but every time I sent a letter that came back, every time I called and got voicemail, every Christmas I spent without contact, I wrote it down. Date, what I did, what happened, and Sandra's letter from 2010, the one accusing me of being controlling. I kept that too in a box in my closet with the journals. I kept it because something in me understood, even then, that someday the story was going to be told in public, and I needed to be ready to tell the true one. 15 years passed. They pass the way years pass when you fill them up with real things. Work, friendship, garden, prayer, travel, one very demanding cat, and the slow daily practice of choosing your own life when someone else has tried to take it from you. And then a Tuesday evening in October, someone knocked on my door. Alexander and Sandra walked into my living room, and I watched them see my life. That is the only way I can describe it. They had not seen this house. They had never seen this house. They walked in, and they saw 15 years of a life that had gone on without them, and I watched their faces arrange themselves around that knowledge. The living room is small. I have never had a great deal of furniture, and I like space, so the room breathes. There is a couch in a deep terracotta color that I bought at an estate sale in 2014, a wooden coffee table that Dolores helped me refinish, a braided rug, gold and brown, and one wall, the wall directly across from the couch, that is covered floor to ceiling in frames. I did not plan that wall as any kind of statement. I built it the way people build things when they are living one piece at a time, 1 year at a time. My retirement certificate from the school district, a photograph of my garden in the spring, all 4 rose bushes in bloom, a picture of my Tuesday circle at the church Christmas party, all 8 of us in terrible holiday sweaters, laughing at something Margaret said, a photograph from Santa Fe, me standing on the porch of the inn at sunset, mountains behind me, glass of wine in my hand, Dolores and I at the Tucson Botanical Garden, a drawing Dolores's granddaughter made of my cat Biscuit with his name written in uneven capital letters across the bottom, and birthday cards, a collection of them, small, framed behind glass, from children who were not my grandchildren but who had, over 15 years, made me their Abuela Joe. The cards are crayon and marker, and the spelling is approximate, and they are the most beautiful things on that wall. Alexander stood in front of that wall for a long time. Sandra stood slightly behind him. I watched her eyes move across the frames, cataloging. That is the word. Cataloging. The way she always looked at things. Then Alexander turned around, and his face had something in it I had not seen in 15 years. Not guilt. That came later. This was something older than guilt. Something younger. The face a boy makes when he understands something irrevocable. I let them stand there. I did not speak. Then Sandra said, quietly, without any visible emotion, "You have a nice home, Josefina." I looked at her. "Thank you," I said, and nothing else. I walked to the left side of the room, to the small shelf unit near the hallway. There are books there, and a ceramic pot from Santa Fe, and 2 framed photographs. The first, Alexander at 5 years old, sitting at the kitchen table of our San Antonio house, missing his 2 front teeth, holding up a drawing he made of our cat. We had a cat then too, a fat orange one named Chuo, with the pride of a person who has created a masterpiece. He is grinning. His eyes are completely light. The second, the three of us, me and Ernesto and Alexander, 1987. Alexander is 12. Ernesto has his arm around both of us. We are at a picnic somewhere. I cannot remember the exact occasion. And the sun is coming at us sideways, and all three of us are squinting and laughing at something. We look, in that photograph, like the definition of all right. I said, I kept these. I always kept these. Alexander looked at the photographs, and I heard him exhale a long, shaking breath that he had been holding for longer than the drive to Tucson. Sandra said nothing. I said, sit down. They sat on the terracotta couch. I sat in my chair across from them. Biscuit came in from the bedroom, assessed the situation with professional skepticism, and left. Then I said, tell me everything. Not the version that asks me for something. The actual truth. The story they told me took 40 minutes. I did not interrupt. I asked one question at the end. This is what they said. Sandra's marketing firm, which she had built over 15 years, had contracted sharply during 2021. She had taken on a large client who defaulted on their contract. There was a lawsuit which settled, but the legal fees were significant and the reputation damage was worse. By 2022, the firm had downsized from 14 employees to 3, then to just Sandra herself operating out of a home office. Alexander, who had been a project manager for a construction company, was laid off in the fall of 2022 when the company downsized. He found contract work, but it was inconsistent, and the income gap between what they earned and what they owed grew every month. The house I had contributed $20,000 toward in 2009 had a mortgage they could no longer service. They had missed payments beginning in early 2023. They had tried to negotiate a forbearance with the bank. It had not gone as they hoped. By the time they were sitting on my couch in October, they were $40,000 behind, and the foreclosure notice had arrived. They had asked Sandra's parents, the Merritts, for help. The Merritts had agreed to consider it, but only on the condition that their daughter's family appeared stable and reconciled. Eugene and Carolyn Merritt were, by Sandra's own reluctant description, people who cared a great deal about appearances. They had grown concerned over the years about the estrangement from Alexander's mother. It looked, Eugene Merritt had apparently said more than once, bad. It looked like dysfunction. It looked like something people with poor judgment allowed. And so the request to me was not only financial. It was cosmetic. They needed me to reconcile with Sandra, or at least to appear to, so that the Merritts would feel comfortable releasing funds. I sat with that for a full minute after Alexander finished speaking. Then I asked my one question. Alexander, did Sandra tell her parents why we stopped speaking? Did they ever hear her version of what happened? The silence that followed was complete. Sandra looked at her hands. Alexander looked at Sandra. I had my answer. She told them. I said, keeping my voice even, that we had grown apart. Didn't she? She told them it was a natural drifting, that you two needed your space, that I understood. Sandra lifted her eyes to me. For the first time since they had walked into my house, I saw something other than control in her face. I am not entirely sure what it was. Not remorse. Maybe something adjacent to it. The recognition of being seen accurately. I said, she did not tell them about the letter. She did not tell them that she instructed you to stop calling me and required all communication go through her. She did not tell them about the garbage bags. I looked at Alexander. He was looking at the floor. He had not, I noticed, stopped looking at the floor since they sat down. It was a posture I recognized from January of 2011. Some habits are very durable. The Merritts, I said, believe this estrangement is a polite, mutual, adult arrangement. And if they knew the truth, if they knew what that letter said, and what I found on that porch in January of 2011, they would look at this situation differently. Wouldn't they? Sandra said, without looking up. My parents have certain expectations. I imagine they do, I said. Most people do. There was a silence. Then Sandra raised her eyes to mine. Josefina, I know this has been hard. I know the situation is difficult. I'm not asking you to forgive everything. I'm asking you to think about the children, about Lily and Mateo, about what kind of relationship we could all build going forward. It was a well-constructed appeal. She had clearly prepared it. It had the right components. Acknowledgement of difficulty, reframing away from the past, the children as leverage, the promise of a future. I had spent 15 years getting very good at recognizing well-constructed appeals. I said, "How old is Lily now?" 12, Alexander said. And Mateo? 10. I looked at Alexander. I have never met them. He closed his eyes. I found out Lily existed from a Facebook post. I said, from someone I used to go to church with who had seen a photo Sandra posted. I found out I had a granddaughter from a stranger, and then 2 years later, a grandson. The room was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Outside, a dog barked once and was still. I am not going to decide anything tonight, I said. I need you both to go back to wherever you're staying. I need to think, and I need you to come back tomorrow. Alexander, you come alone. There are things I need to say to you that are between a mother and her son, not a mother and her son and his wife. Sandra started to speak. I looked at her steadily, and she stopped. Tomorrow, I said, Alexander, alone. 10 in the morning. They left at 8:15. I stood at my window and watched their rental car back out of my driveway. Then I went to my bedroom and I opened the closet and I got down the box. The box is not dramatic looking. It is a brown storage box from the office supply store, the kind with the lid that sits on top. I bought it in 2011. I have filled it and emptied it into a second box, and then a third. By the time I opened it that October night, there were 3 boxes. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I began to go through them. The journals first, 14 of them, covering from 2011 to the present. Different notebooks. I have never been consistent about the size or color. I just bought whatever I found, but consistent in their contents. Dated entries. What I was feeling. What I did with that feeling. The days I was fine. The days I was not. The day in 2016 when I found out about Lily and wrote 6 pages at 2 in the morning in a handwriting that got looser and more desperate as the hours went on. The day in 2018 when I found out about Mateo. That entry was shorter, cleaner. I had already learned by then to hold the grief at a certain distance. The unsent letters, 23 of them, folded, dated. Some are short, some are very long. None of them are angry, which surprises me even now when I read them. They are honest, plain-spoken. They are the letters of a woman who loved her son and wanted him to know she was still there, still his mother, still alive in all the ways that mattered. The birthday cards. I bought Alexander a card every year. His birthday is April 12th. I bought the card. I wrote something inside. I never mailed it. After the letters came back the first time, I understood that sending them was not the point. The point was that I did not stop marking the day. I did not pretend the day did not exist. Every April 12th, I bought a card and I wrote in it and I kept it. 15 cards in 15 years. There is also a card I bought for Lily. I bought it when I found out she existed, when she was 2 years old, and I have added to it every year, not new cards, the same card with a small addition each birthday, a line or 2. On the front is a pink butterfly. Inside It now fills every bit of white space in my small cramped handwriting. Things I would have said if I'd been allowed to say them. First day of school. I imagine you have your grandfather Ernesto's eyes. I hope someone is reading to you. And then, at the bottom of the second box, Sandra's letter. I have read that letter perhaps 100 times. Maybe more. I read it in the early years with devastation. I read it in the middle years with anger. I read it in the later years with a certain clinical distance, the way a doctor reads a chart. That night, sitting on the edge of my bed at 9 in the evening, I read it again. 4 pages. Typed single-spaced. The accusations. Controlling, emotionally dependent, smothering, refusing to respect boundaries, making Sandra feel like an outsider. The signature at the bottom, in different font. Alexander's name. I read it, and I did not feel devastated. I did not feel angry. I felt something I had not expected to feel, clarity, because I had just sat across from the woman who wrote this letter, and I had watched her construct a new story in real time in my living room with her husband sitting beside her saying nothing of his own accord. And I understood that the letter was not an assessment of me. It was a document she produced to protect a system she had built, a system in which Alexander's family existed only on her terms, with her as the administrator. That is not a relationship. That is management. I put the letter back in the box. I put the boxes back in the closet. I went to the kitchen and made chamomile tea. I sat at the table, and I thought about Alexander, not the 49-year-old man on my couch, but the 12-year-old boy in the photograph, the one squinting into the sun with his father's arm around him. That boy had been handed a choice he should never have been given. He had been very young, not in years, but in the particular way that some people are young. They cannot hold their own ground when someone they love applies enough pressure. Ernesto had that quality too. Actually, that sweetness that made him easy to move. I had loved that about Ernesto. I had worked hard to build Alexander's confidence precisely because I had seen that softness in him, and I had wanted him to be strong enough to protect it. I had not succeeded completely. That is something I have had to make peace with. But he was here. He had come. That was not nothing. Alexander arrived at 10 in the morning, alone. He was wearing a plain gray shirt. No jacket. He looked like he had not slept. The gray at his temples was more visible in the morning light. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, across from each other, with our cups, the way we had sat hundreds of times before. There is a particular quality to a kitchen table that does not exist anywhere else. It is the furniture of plain truth. People do not perform very well at kitchen tables. There is nowhere to look except at each other. I said, "How long have things been this bad, financially?" "About 3 years," he said. "We hid it for a while. We didn't want." He stopped. "Sandra didn't want anyone to know." "Including you?" I asked. He looked at me. "Sometimes. Not always. She manages the finances. She always has." I noted that. I did not comment on it. "Alexander," I said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear the whole question before you answer it. Will you do that?" He nodded. "When you stood at the end of that hallway in January of 2011, and you watched Sandra tell me my things were in the garage, when you watched me pick up those bags and carry them to my car, did you believe in that moment that I was going to be all right?" He was very still. "Did you think, my mother is strong, she'll recover, she'll be fine?" Did you tell yourself that? Because I need to know. I need to know whether you thought about it at all, or whether you were so focused on managing your own situation that the question of what happened to me simply didn't arise. He looked at the table. Then he looked at me. His eyes were red. "I told myself you'd be fine," he said. "I told myself you were strong, that you had your church, your friends, that you'd be okay. And did you believe it?" A long pause. "No," he said quietly. I don't think I did. Then why? He put both hands flat on the table. Because I didn't know how to do both. How to be her husband and your son at the same time. Sandra, she needed things. She needed certainty. She needed to know she was first. And I didn't know how to give her that while also showing up for you the way you deserved. So he stopped. I chose the path of least resistance. That's an honest answer. I said, I appreciate it. Mom, let me finish. I was not harsh. I want you to understand that. I was very calm. I had had 15 years to prepare this conversation. I wasn't all right. I want you to know that. I was not all right for a very long time. I had nights that were very dark. I had a stretch in 2013 that was the hardest of my life, including the year your father died. I was alone in a way that I do not have words for, because the loneliness of being estranged from a living child is different from the loneliness of grief. Grief you can name. People understand grief. What I had didn't have a common name. He was crying, quietly, like the night before, without sound. I built a life anyway. I said, I want you to know that too. Not because the pain went away, but because I chose to. I filled the empty spaces with real things. I am, right now, genuinely all right. I have friends who would do anything for me. I have a home I love. I have a life that is mine. I let that sit. But I also have 15 years of not knowing your children. 15 years of your children not knowing me. And that I stopped for the first time because there was something in my throat. That one I am not all right about. Lily and Mateo have a grandmother who has been buying cards for them and writing in them and never once being able to send them. That is a loss for all of us, not just me. I know, he said. Does Sandra know? Really know. He looked at me. I don't know what Sandra knows. I think there are things she understood and things she didn't want to understand. And I think I let her not understand them. I didn't push. I should have pushed. Yes, I said. You should have. We sat quietly for a moment. The morning light came through the east-facing window, warm and clear. I thought about Ernesto, about how he would have handled this. He would have put his arm around Alexander and cried with him and probably forgiven everything before breakfast. Ernesto was made that way. I am made somewhat differently. I am not closing the door. I said, I want you to hear that. I am not saying goodbye to you again, but I am also not going back to a version of this relationship that is managed by someone else. If I am in your life, I am in your life as myself, as your mother, not as a resource to be accessed when needed, not as a background figure who gets updates through Facebook posts, not as someone whose visits require approval from another adult. Alexander looked at me, and I saw something shift, the kind of shift that happens when a person stops negotiating and starts hearing. And the financial situation, I said, we are going to talk about that honestly. But first tell me something. Mateo, does he know his grandmother exists? We told them you lived far away. He said, Tucson is 6 hours from Phoenix, Alexander. I know. What does Lily know? She knows your name. She knows Sandra told her once that you and she had some difficulties, that families sometimes go through that. He wiped his eyes. Lily asked me about 2 years ago why Grandma Jo never came to visit. I told her, you were busy. I held that. She called me Grandma Jo. I said, she must have heard it from somewhere. I don't know. I stood up. I walked to the counter. I opened the cabinet above the stove. In the very back, behind the coffee and the rice, is the small paper bag I have been adding to for years. 15 birthday cards, each one dated. One card for Lily, dense with 15 years of writing. One card I started for Mateo when I found out he existed, fewer years, but already full. I brought them to the table, and I set them down. Alexander looked at them. He picked up Lily's card. He opened it. He read it. He did not make it to the end before he had to stop reading. I kept time. I said, I wasn't there, but I kept time. He put the card down. He put both hands over his face. And then he said, into his hands, muffled and broken, I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry for what we did to you. We. He said we. I will tell you honestly. That word did not escape my notice. But I also believe it was genuine. I believe he was sorry. I believe he had been sorry for a long time in the way that people are sorry when they have done something they cannot undo. Silently, at 3 a.m. in the place inside themselves they don't show anyone. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. I know, I said, I know you are. That afternoon, Sandra came back to the house. I had asked Alexander to bring her. There were things I needed to say to both of them together, and it seemed better to say them when I had the chance, not in pieces through Alexander. I had made lunch, nothing elaborate, soup and sandwiches, because I was not performing hospitality. I was having a conversation, and people have conversations better with something in front of them. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us. Alexander's eyes were still red from the morning. Sandra's face was, as always, composed, but something had changed. Some small degree of the composure was missing. When she sat down, she tucked her hands in her lap in a way I had not seen her do before. She looked, for the first time, like someone uncertain of her footing. I said, I am going to tell you what I have decided, and then I am going to explain why. Sandra nodded. I am not going to give you money, I said. I want to be direct about that, so there is no ambiguity going forward. I am 67 years old. My savings are not a windfall. They are the security I will need for medical care, for housing, for aging. I cannot and will not put them at risk, regardless of what is happening with the mortgage. That is my final answer on the financial question. Alexander started to speak. I raised one hand. Let me finish. I am also not going to co-sign any loan. The reasons are the same. Sandra looked at the table. However, I said, I want to give you something more useful than money. I had made a phone call the night before. My friend Gerald Fitch is a housing counselor. He volunteers with a HUD-approved nonprofit in Tucson that works with homeowners facing foreclosure. I had described the situation in general terms, without names. He had outlined the options. I told them what he told me. First, HUD-approved housing counseling. Free, federally backed. A counselor sits with you, reviews your full financial picture, contacts the lender on your behalf, and negotiates. The options can include loan modification, forbearance extensions, repayment plans structured over years, not months. Many people do not know these programs exist. Many lenders do not volunteer the information. A housing counselor knows how to navigate it. Second, making home affordable programs. Depending on the specifics of the loan and the situation, there may be modification programs they have not yet accessed. Gerald could assess eligibility in one conversation. Third, if the foreclosure could not be stopped, a short sale arranged through counseling is significantly less damaging to long-term credit than a completed foreclosure. And some programs provide relocation assistance. Gerald Fitch's name and number are on a piece of paper in the kitchen. I said, he is expecting your call. His services cost nothing. He has done this work for 20 years. He is very good at it. Alexander and Sandra looked at each other. Something passed between them. Not the managed, aligned look I had seen in the living room the night before. Something more uncertain, more real. Sandra said, why are you doing this? I looked at her directly. Because you are my son's family. Because Lily and Mateo are my grandchildren, even if I have never been permitted to know them. And because I believe in solving problems with the right tools. The right tool for a financial problem is financial knowledge, not a 67-year-old woman emptying her savings. Sandra did not look away. I will give her that. There is something else I need to say. I said, to you, Sandra. Directly. She straightened slightly. I read your letter again last night. The one you wrote me in 2010. I have read it many times over the years. I read it last night, and I want to say something about it that I have never had the chance to say. She was very still. You had things you were entitled to. I said, every woman who marries deserves to have a marriage that is hers, a home that is hers, a husband who is genuinely present. If there were things I did that made you feel crowded, I would have been willing to hear that. I am not above examination. But the letter you wrote did not ask me to change specific behaviors. It instructed me to surrender direct access to my son and conduct all contact through you. That is not a boundary. That is an arrangement. And the letter you wrote was not the beginning of a conversation. It was the end of one. Sandra said, nothing. I do not know what you were protecting. I said, I am not going to spend this conversation speculating, but I want you to understand that what happened to me over these 15 years was not a neutral outcome. It caused real harm. I am telling you this not to assign blame. I am telling you because going forward, I need honesty. I need to know what I am walking into and who I am walking into it with. If there is to be anything between us, anything real, it starts with that. Sandra looked at me for a long time. Then she said quietly, I hear you. It was not an apology. I did not expect one. Not yet. But it was the first thing she had said to me in 15 years that did not have an agenda visible underneath it. Good, I said. Then I said, I want to meet Lily and Mateo. Alexander exhaled. I am not asking for anything elaborate. I said, I am not asking for a family reunion or a performance of reconciliation. I am asking to meet my grandchildren in a normal way, for coffee, for lunch, for a walk in a park. Something simple and honest. Sandra nodded slowly. That can happen, Alexander said. I also need you both to understand something. I said, my involvement in your children's lives. If we build that, we'll be on honest terms. They will know that I exist, that I love them, and that we were apart for reasons that grown-ups sometimes have. I will not ask them to take sides. I will not undermine you, but I will also not pretend the past did not happen, and I will not teach them that relationships are something you walk away from without explanation and pick back up without accountability. That is not a lesson I am willing to pass on. Sandra looked at me. And then something happened that I had not expected and was not prepared for. She said, you raised him to expect honesty, and I punished him for it. The words were plain, almost toneless, like something said to herself rather than to me. I did not respond immediately. I let the words be in the room. Then I said, knowing something is the first step. We finished lunch in relative quiet. Before they left, I walked them to the door. Alexander hugged me, carefully at first, and then fully, the way people hug when they stop worrying about whether they have the right to. He held on. I let him. Sandra stood slightly to the side. When Alexander released me, she looked at me and said, thank you for seeing us. I said, call Gerald tomorrow. First thing. She nodded. They got in the rental car. I stood at the door and watched them go. Then I closed it and stood in my hallway in the quiet of my house, and I pressed my hand flat against the wall. 3 months passed. I will not pretend they were easy months. The worst thing about hope, once you have learned to live without it, is what happens when it comes back. It makes you vulnerable again. You have to build new tolerances. You have to learn all over again how to want something without making it a requirement for your peace. Dolores, who understood this without being told, showed up at my house every Tuesday with food and absolutely no expectation that I talk about it. Margaret, at the Tuesday Circle, prayed for Lily and Mateo by name, which made me cry in a way I had not cried in years. Corinne Babcock said, simply, "Whatever happens, Joe, you know who you are." That is the most useful thing anyone has ever said to me. Gerald Fitch called me 3 weeks after Alexander and Sandra's visit. He did not give me details, that was private, and Gerald is a professional, but he said the call had happened and that they were actively working through options. He sounded, in his careful Gerald way, cautiously optimistic. 6 weeks after their visit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize with a Phoenix area code. I answered. A 10-year-old voice said, "Is this Grandma Joe?" I sat down. "Yes," I said. "Yes, it is." "My name is Lily," she said. "My dad said I could call you. He said you used to know him when he was little." "I did," I said. "I knew him very well. He showed me a picture of you from a long time ago. You're at a picnic." "Yes," I said. "The photo on the shelf." "You're squinting," she said. "Everyone is squinting." "It was a very sunny day," I said. "Your grandfather took that photo." There was a small pause. "My dad said his dad died before I was born." "That's right, before you were born. But he would have loved you very much. He was that kind of person." Another pause. Then she said, "You have a cat?" "I do. His name is Biscuit." "Why Biscuit?" "Because when I first got him, he was the color of a biscuit, tan and golden. He has gotten considerably fatter since then." She laughed. It was a bright, quick laugh, unself-conscious, the kind of laugh that belongs entirely to childhood. It went straight through me. We talked for 11 minutes. I know because when she said goodbye and the call ended, I looked at the time and I wrote it down. 6 weeks after that, I drove to Phoenix. Alexander met me in the parking lot of a park in their neighborhood. A nice park with large old trees and a walking path around a small man-made lake. Mateo was with him. My grandson is 13 and already taller than his father, and he shook my hand with the solemnity of a young man who has been told to be on his best behavior and has taken the instruction seriously. "It's good to meet you," he said. "It is very good to meet you," I said. "Your father tells me you play baseball." "Shortstop," he said, and then he began to talk, and within 2 minutes the formality was gone entirely, and he was explaining the mechanics of the shortstop position with the earnestness of someone who has thought about it a great deal and is grateful for any audience willing to engage. He reminded me so strongly of Ernesto that I had to look away for a moment. Sandra was there. She was quiet. She did not stand between Alexander and me, or between me and the children, as I had half expected. She stood slightly to the side and let the afternoon be what it was. When Lily, who appeared from behind a tree where she had been waiting, apparently for a dramatically appropriate moment, ran toward me with the confidence of a child who has decided something, Sandra watched. Her face was not composed in its usual way. It was just a face. A woman watching her daughter run toward a grandmother she had been kept from for a decade. Lily is 10 years old with brown eyes exactly like Ernesto's and a way of holding her chin up when she talks that I recognized immediately as Alexander's. She stopped in front of me and looked at me carefully. "You're taller than I thought," she said. "You're exactly as I imagined." I said. She considered this. "What did you imagine?" "Someone very curious," I said, with her grandfather's eyes. She reached out and took my hand, just like that. No ceremony. A child making a decision about a person and acting on it without hesitation. I thought, this is what Alexander once was. This is what we nearly lost. We walked the path around the lake. All 5 of us. Mateo talked to Alexander. Lily walked with me and asked questions with the thoroughness of someone who has a list. Did I have a garden? What did I grow? Was Biscuit mean or just unfriendly? What was Alexander like when he was her age? Did I cook? What was my favorite food? I answered every question. Sandra walked alongside, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Once, when Lily ran ahead to look at ducks on the lake, Sandra came and walked beside me for a moment. She said, "She's been asking to call you again." "I'd like that," I said. "I know I haven't. There's a lot I haven't said." "There is," I agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know how to do this correctly. I'm not sure there is a correct way." "There isn't," I said. "There is only honest. One day at a time." She nodded. We walked in silence for a bit. Then she said, "She has Ernesto's eyes, Lily does. Alexander always said she looked like him. I used to look at old photos to see if he was right. I looked at her. You were looking at photos of my late husband. I was looking at photos of her grandfather," Sandra said quietly, trying to understand where she came from. "I thought about the journal in my closet, the letters I never sent, the birthday cards, the 15 years of keeping time. I thought about the cost of the system Sandra had built and whether she had understood fully what it cost her children too, what Lily and Mateo had lost, not just me, but the whole side of themselves that came through Alexander, through Ernesto, through the Wilson line that went back through San Antonio and further. I do not know if Sandra knows. I think she is beginning to." I said, "Mateo has Ernesto's build. He's going to be a big man." Sandra looked at her son ahead on the path. Something moved through her face. "He has Alexander's stubbornness," she said. "He digs in." "Wilsons dig in," I said. She almost smiled. On the drive home that evening, I stopped at a garden center just outside of Tucson. It was nearly closing time, but they let me in. I bought a rose bush, a new variety, a deep coral pink, the color of that October sunset in Santa Fe the year I went alone. I planted it the next morning in the back corner of the yard, where the light is right. 5 rose bushes, now. 1 for every decade of my adult life, more or less. I have not explained this to anyone. I do not need to. The garden knows what it means. What I want to tell you, sitting here now on the other side of all of this, is something I spent 15 years learning and 3 months confirming. You do not have to destroy yourself to keep a door open. A door can be open without you standing in the gap of it, holding it with your body, waiting for someone to come back. You can go about your life. You can garden and travel and make friends and build something real and whole and still have a door. And when someone knocks, you can choose how to answer. You can ask, "Did you bring the trash bags?" And then you can step back and say, "Come in. I have something to show you." Not because you have forgiven everything, not because you have forgotten anything, but because you are strong enough to know the difference between letting someone back into your life and giving them back control of it. Those are not the same thing. They never were. Money is not love. Compliance is not reconciliation. A performance of family is not family. But a 10-year-old girl on the phone asking why your cat is named Biscuit, that is something. That is the beginning of something. And I am 67 years old, and I have learned to take beginnings seriously. I have also learned, this is the thing I want you to carry with you, that the life you build in the waiting is not a lesser life. It is not a placeholder. It is your actual life, and it deserves your full presence, your full investment, your full self. Every woman watching this who is carrying a wound like mine, estranged from a child, estranged from a grandchild, estranged from a family that was supposed to be yours, I need you to hear this. Your worth is not determined by their return. You are not a waiting room. You are a life. Go live it fully. Every Tuesday morning, every rose bush, every cup of coffee with the neighbor who has the key to your house. Live it completely, and if they come back, you will be whole enough to meet them. If they don't, you will be whole enough to be all right. And if this story touched something in you, if you recognized yourself anywhere in it, I want to know. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me where you are listening from and what you are carrying and what you have built in the waiting. Because this channel is for all of us. The women who held on, the women who let go, the women who built their lives one rosebush at a time when no one was watching. Like this video if it stayed with you. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And take care of yourself. Nobody else can do that part for you.